Dr. Shabir Ally, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
My pleasure to be on.
Now, Muslims care a lot about their earnings and where it's coming from. But of course, the wider society, everybody should care about what sort of earnings they're making and where it's coming from, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, ethics and morality is not exclusively a Muslim domain. Everyone should be concerned, and generally are concerned about who they work for and where they're getting their income from.
Some people might be concerned if they're working at a weapons factory, for example, and it's being used to kill people. Then they might think, well, I don't want to be part of this, right?
Yes. Am I going to enjoy my dinner knowing that my dinner is bought with money that is,
making rockets, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Muslim concern, of course, is ongoing because there are many items that the Muslim would be concerned about when it comes to earning.
Well, first, a step back. Can I ask? What does Islam actually say about that? Is there something within the Quran and Hadith that emphasizes the need to have halal earnings?
Yes. For example, there are verses in the Quran that say that if you misappropriate the wealth of an orphan, then you're eating fire into your bellies. So you take the orphan's wealth as though it were your own. You used it to buy your food. You're eating that. Well, consider that you're eating fire into your belly. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't eat fire. Why would you eat the orphan's wealth? So more generally, the Quran speaks about fulfilling your contracts and measuring out when you're measuring with a proper measure. So imagine you're selling cloth and you're using like a short stick to measure out. Of course, nowadays we have standard measures, but in ancient society, the measures would not have been so standard, and somebody could cheat by using a shorter measure.
Or if you're selling produce,
yes,
and you're using a scale.
You're using a scale and using improper weights. So the Quran is emphasizing that you should use proper weights. And some of the stories of the prophets, like the story of the prophet Shu'aib, for example, he's telling people, that you should weigh with proper weights. So both in story form and in terms of legislation, the Quran is emphasizing for Muslims that they should be honest and fair and avoid any sort of cheating in doing business and in transactions more generally, and to fulfill their contracts, to honor their agreements, and so on. So the followed from all of this is that Muslims understand that if you're going to earn any money, then that money itself has to be what we say halal or permissible. Before we even talk about the food itself. Like we distinguish between permissible and impermissible foods. Like it's permissible to eat the meats of cows, but forbidden to eat the meat of swine. So that's the meat itself. But the money you use to buy the meat itself has to be itself halal or permissible. And that entails that you could not be lying or cheating to obtain it. You cannot be falsely clocking your time to clock more hours than you actually worked, because the extra time that you get paid for is not legitimately paid for, and that money is not legitimately yours. You cannot use that to feed yourself or your family.
So what you've said so far are things that, the average Canadian would know, like not cheating, not lying. But what about things where, within Islamic law, for Muslims, something is impermissible, but within the wider society, it's very widespread and it's not seen as harmful?
Yes. So one thing that quickly comes to mind is trading in alcohol. So for Muslims, this is a no-no. You cannot trade in alcohol. No, that introduces some gray areas, and Muslims are going to be wondering, what if I'm working in an establishment, like let's say I'm working in a restaurant, so the main business in the restaurant is selling food. That's what restaurants are for, right? As opposed to, let's say, a pub. So working in the pub, that obviously is not gonna slide, because that's the main business. But now there's a question about food, and if we say no, Muslims cannot work in restaurants, well then that means a whole industry is closed off to Muslims. So what Muslim scholars generally do is that they look at the situation, they ask, okay, first of all, are you are you like the cause of something? Or is it going to be the same whether you're in it or are not in it. Okay, that's one consideration. That's not the full consideration.
Okay.
It's not like we can't beat them, so let's join them type of
Yeah.
thing, because that would get us into all kinds of wrong things. But that's one consideration. The other consideration is that, yeah, we don't want to close off the whole industry to Muslims. And third, and perhaps most important, like, what is the main component here? What is the main thing? So the main thing is food, and it's permissible to sell food and to serve food. Now, if a Muslim can avoid this altogether, this is best. Then there's no question. There's no question of conscience. You don't go back home at the end of the day and you're trying to sleep at night and wondering, but I did pour that alcohol. Is that, but God asked me about that on the day of judgment. So it's better not to be in that situation at all, not
Yes,
to have
but
a
some
question.
people can't choose
Yeah,
necessarily.
but yeah, if that's the only job you can have at the moment, take it even temporarily to be able to stand on your feet. Keep actively looking for another job until you get one, and then you make the switch, even if it's for a lower wage. But at least now you have a clear conscience.
What about interest? Because we live in an interest-based society, and many people, the question is, can we work at banks, for example?
Yeah. So there's an interesting statement in a hadith in this respect, saying that a time will come that when, even if you don't take interest, the dust of interest will touch you. And now we're in that situation where interest is so pervasive. I mean, even if you give a last month's rent in advance for the place you're leasing, the interest will accumulate on that rent, and eventually, suddenly, the Muslim will be surprised to learn that they have some interest income from that deposit that was made for the last month's rent. So what do you do with it in that case? So we say that you get rid of it. Don't consider it to be your own. Give it away to some charitable cause, and don't consider that to be your usual charities paid. You haven't given any charity yet. You've just disposed of this unwanted, illegitimately earned money, and don't give it to somebody for food. Give it to something that won't translate into food, like, let's say, cancer research or something like this, that does not benefit any one specific individual, because we don't want this tainted money to end up as a resource for somebody's provision, right? Then what about working in that situation where, there is some question of interest? Well, let's say you're working in a bank. Well, the bank is providing many services, and there has to be a record keeper, for example. Somebody has to keep the records, the books, do the accounting, and so on. So if you're not directly in a loan transaction in which you are transacting for interest, then it's more excusable than if you're there, dishing out a loan and charging interest on the loan. So the different degrees here we're noticing of involvement in the actual prohibited item. But again, if you can avoid working in the bank altogether, then your conscience is totally clear. I have nothing to do with that. I'm totally clean.
We're going to leave it at that. Thank you for your time, Dr. Shabir
You're
Ally.
welcome.